air. Well, comrades, I feel sorry for you and for everybody who intervened. And especially, but I think everyone, but Chris, who has made the effort to go into the details about quantitative easing and will probably like to discuss it a bit more in detail with us afterwards on the bar and so on, or with the comrade who touched the Volcker moment, which has been an extremely important moment, but of course with 6 minutes, it's not possible. And to go into all the questions is more easy, because I only had one question from Ray. The others made interventions. But to go into everything I would like to say about the interventions, which all provoke new issues, that would of course be a different question. Do you remember until a few months ago, back then, the World Bank, the IMF, all the central banks, they were saying, don't cut back too shortly the quantitative easing, don't raise the interest rates too brutally, because you might provoke a recession. That's what they said. Today, it's completely switched, the whole reasoning. I have the Wall Street Journal, very right wing. If you want to read it, remember, very right wing. But what they said last Monday, not this one, the last one, is historically, they say, getting inflation down from such high levels, the 9%, to 2%, the Fed's target, would require higher unemployment and a recession. That's what they say. And then they continue, the Fed is hoping this time will be different. I believe that. I believe they have that hope. I believe they hope they can provoke a mild, or what they call a moderate recession. I do not think that they absolutely want a recession. I think they want to bring inflation down, and if the price to pay for it is a recession, well, then they and us in the first place will have to pay that price. That's, to my opinion, what is their real issue that they are at this stage bringing. Now, there are two hopes they have, that this time will be different from the 30s and from the 70s. And I want to go into both, but I want to just concentrate on what they say is different. As opposed to the period of stagflation in the 70s, which the dollar went in from a weak position because of the Vietnam War, because of the overaccumulation, because of all a series of other factors that played in, because it's always a combination of factors. But the key factor was overaccumulation and insufficient profitability. That was the key factor, added on with many others. Then the dollar was weak. Today, the dollar is strong. Not because of the strength of the American economy, but because of the weakness of all the other economies. What we have today, I don't know if you know that phenomena of lending cheap money in the US to buy stocks and assets in other countries and raise a profit with that without investing anything yourself, just lending. You'd call it carry trade. What you have today is an inverse carry trade. The increasing of the rent rates by the Fed makes the investment in obligation in the US much more interesting, much more secure. You have a flight to security that is taking place and a reversal of the carry trade. That explains mainly the strength of the dollar today. Does it have advantages? For the US, yes. Does it have disadvantages? For all the countries that have debt standing out in dollars or in any other currency which is a bit more stable linked to the dollar, for all of them, it's a complete disaster, because indeed it makes their repayment of the debts, of course, much more expensive. And then the other thing they say that is today different is the level of unemployment. We didn't see yet at this stage the kind of figures that we saw not at the beginning of the period of stagflation, and I think they are a bit early to cry victory, but we do not see the levels of unemployment at this stage, at least not in the US, not in Europe, as we had in the previous period of stagflation. But the market has been seriously deregularized. Temporary work is all over the case. You have the kind of jobs that are really so unstable that sometimes in the official statistics, which are based on surveys amongst bosses in the US, they don't even appear. You have in the US not only a survey based on the employers, which indicate that this year 377,000 jobs were created in the US. You also have a survey amongst households, which measures it month to month. And according to this one, there was a loss of 116,000 jobs. Now, from where the difference? Because in this one, real jobs are counted, meaning also the nannies are in it, and a whole packet of other people. If all this would be counted in the US, unemployment would not be 3.6%. It would be around 9–10% at this stage, this early stage of the recession we are confronted with. Actually, it is now recognized that in the first trimester of this year, economy would have shrunk by 1.6% in the US. It's going to be corrected, that figure. It's always, a few months later, they correct it. And the second quarter would be minus 1.2%, better than China, which in the second quarter had minus 2.6%. But that's the situation we are confronted with, and better also than in Europe, where there are supplementary elements that play a role. That is the situation we are confronted with. It was Seba, but another comrade, I think it was Ali from Austria, who gave us that nice picture of the waves in the sea, which are hiding the processes that are playing in a way we can't see it yet, but they are really there. They both pointed to the multifaceted aspect of this crisis. I would rather turn it around. Usually when you have a crisis and you are not capable to solve that crisis, the crisis will tend to infect all the bodies around it. All the aspects around it will be affected by it. You cannot just, when you have a small problem in your car, continue driving, because then that small problem will provoke other problems. And after a while, the car won't drive anymore. For those who already lived through that, that's the reason why it didn't drive anymore. But that's the same with the economy. If you don't intervene, it will begin to spread out and it will infect all aspects of society. And that's, of course, the climate transition, which will be an enormous cost. It's very clear for all of us. It's a question of the war, but it's, for example, also the time bomb of the pension systems that come up to us, the time bomb in the health system that come up to us. A few days ago, Amazon was announcing that it would start to invest in healthcare and rebuy a number of companies. You are going for a real industrialization, the same way Dana was referring to. I don't see Dana. Was referring to in on the food. That's what you're gonna have in the health system, because it's typical. If your investments do not bring in the required return in one sector, like in the 1990s, it was Southeast Asia, then it went to dot-coms, then it became the housing crisis, and it kept shifting from one area to the other one. And then it became food, which then led to the Arab Spring, what we call the revolution and counter-revolution in the Middle East and Northern Africa. And what you have today with the food crisis is for speculators an exceptional favorable situation to now buy up what still has to be harvested in the future. And that explains a big part of the increase already of the prices before the war, which were over 30% then, and are now, of course, enormously touched by the rest. So if the bourgeoisie today says we are ready to risk a recession, and we hope it will be a moderate one. We hope it will be, they're not sure it will be a moderate one. We can be quite sure it will not be a moderate one. Very sure about that. But they hope, against better knowing in, that it will be a moderate one, because they don't have a choice. It is because they are so extremely afraid that they will, at a certain stage, land in a situation where even with a recession, they are not capable anymore to drive back inflation. That the whole idea of what the economists call the Phillips curve, forget about it. The idea that if you have high inflation, high unemployment, your prices will tend to go down and so on. All theories, forget about it. But when they invented the term stagflation, until then, they didn't believe that it was possible to have recession and inflation at the same time. And to get out of that, this famous Volcker moment, and I think that the comrade, Connor is it, I think, made a very, very good choice to raise exactly this point. But this Volcker moment meant that interest rate, real interest rates, in 3 years' time, went up from negative to plus 5%. The result was that inflation went down from 13 to 3%, but unemployment more than doubled in the US during the same period. And actually it was repeated by Thatcher. I don't remember anymore how this central banker was called at that time in Britain. But they went up from a negative real interest rates of 3% to 4% plus in the UK. That was their interest rates. Their inflation immediately went down, but the unemployment immediately more than doubled in the UK. That's the kind of necessity they had to begin to counter the situation of stagflation. And it went together with an enormous attack, because it provoked reaction, an enormous attack against what were then like the strongholds of the workers' movement. The air traffic controllers in the US, a very brutal battle prepared by Reagan, actually. You had already the numbers ready to take over. He sacked them all. Later on, a number of them were re-engaged. And then the miners' strike in Britain, which went on for about a year, which was a decisive battle that actually signed the kind of outcome in the UK, and actually made that element of passing over to neoliberalism a crucial element. But we have to also see the other side. Yes, in the 30s, fascism came to power and so on. Yes, but we also had enormous revolutionary movements in Spain, in France. We had the creation of the CIO in the US. These are all enormous opportunities. And if we look at what stagflation brought us in the 70s, Portuguese Revolution, the collapse of the regime of the colonels in Greece. Franco, they kept them alive, a bit like Sharon. for about a year. They kept him on the machine because they didn't want to let him die easily. We had in Belgium what they called the Friday strikes in 77. We had the winter of discontent in 78, 79 in Britain. And we had the coming to power of Mitterrand in France on a program that was then called revolutionary reformism. We should take that in account. And what the Mitterrand government did, I've noted it down. They engaged 55,000 functionaries, people working for the state, but with an official state. They increased the minimum wage by 10%. They increased child benefit. They gave rent subsidies increased by 25%. They nationalized 36 of the biggest banks. They also nationalized 5 of the biggest industrial groups. They reduced the working hours to 39. They introduced an extra week of paid holiday, the 5th week of paid holiday. There are many other measures. That's the kind of program that was put on the table at that stage. It led to a capital strike. You had buses running over the border with Switzerland. At that time, it was not by computer, it was still by suitcase, with money to Switzerland to bring it in security. But that was the time you had a capital strike against the government of Mitterrand, which immediately illustrated also the limitations that we were confronted with. But in that sense, we have to be very clear. If we only limit ourselves to a negative program, it won't be sufficient. That's the transitional program. It's actually not just pointing to what is wrong in the system. It's also trying to create an idea of what we are proposing. When yesterday it was said that there is no separation between our program, in our opposition against the extreme right and our necessity to create a left alternative, that it's both one of the same element, that's exactly what is said. We need a transitional program, we need a reply. We need to be able at least to give a few indications of what we would propose. And then, of course, the stronger we are, the more roots we have, the stronger we are represented in the workers' movement, the more effect we will have to be able to put that in practice. There is critic and critic. We in general in Belgium, we rarely say that the trade union bureaucrats are traitors, that they are worthless. What we usually say is the conditions where we are in require that kind of initiatives to take. And we force the trade union bureaucrats to say, well, we are not going to take it. And that, according to their membership, immediately makes clear who they are. And if they say, well, we'll take some of it, then they just give us an opportunity to further push them in the back and make sure that we go forward. That's the element, to my opinion, that we have to take, to have in mind when we raise those elements. I don't know anymore. I think it was Cormac, that's the name, eh? Very difficult to remember, but now I saw it written, who referred to the loss in real wages. Well, a month ago, so an age ago in our times, but a month ago in June, the OECD said they expected real wages in the US to decrease this year by 0.6%, in Germany by 2.5%, in the UK by 3%, in Spain by 4.5%. That's the reality that we are at this stage confronted with. That was the reality in the 30s in many countries in Europe and in the US, and led to an enormous opposition. And I believe it was Paul Gerald who made the point that he said we have to pay attention to social movements. I think what he meant to say is those who will react in the first place will probably be those who have little to lose, who can only react. I think it was Logan who referred to the Great Resignation. And to my opinion, one of the elements in it is that the pandemic for many people was like an existential wake-up call, out of which they concluded, it's finished for me. I'm not living for working. I'm working for living. That's the kind of reaction you had. You had other reactions, eh? That's not the point. But I think it's an important element for us that plays in. And in that sense, we do have to pay attention. I don't know if you know that text from Marx, the trade unions, their past, today, and their future. It's only 1.5 pages in which he writes the whole history from the unions. He could do that. He was very strong, but he makes 2 points in it. He says, in our epoch, unions that are not political, they will fail in defending the workers' interest, because the main decisions today are not only taken in the factory level, they are taken at the sector level or at the national or even an international level. That's one point. And the second point he made is those unions which are incapable to defend the most exploited, they will never succeed in defending anyone from the workers' movement in their positions, especially in a period of structural crisis as the one we are in today. And in that sense, the point that Paul was making was absolutely crucial. But the decisive point, which doesn't reduce anything of the importance of doing those interventions, the decisive point in terms of relations of forces, it's very often in the industry. We have 2 shop stewards in Belgium who work in GlaxoSmithKline, that's pharmaceutical industry. At a certain stage last year, they had a conflict over the pandemic premiums in the company. And the trade union was threatening to block the blockbuster, meaning that medication, the building where that medication is made, so it brings most profit for the company. 1 day blockage, a loss of 120 million euros. Like many other companies, like all companies today, big companies today, the profit out of production is only a small part of the total profit, because the profit out of production is then invested either in real estate or in financial products which are linked to this profit, but which multiply the profit level. It means for GSK that the day closure would not only mean 120 million euros in production loss, but it would probably mean also a multiplication of that sum when you consider the full aspect of the total profit. That's what it means, that financialization of the economy, if you are ready to intervene on this level. They didn't have to block it. The whole management was immediately there, and they got all they were asking for. So there was no point at this stage to do that. But I think it's an important element that we should understand. I want to go into the question of Ray, because I could happen to forget just that question, and it was the only one that was clearly posed. Marx is saying in contribution to the political economy that it's not as the capitalists usually think. The money supply that drives the prices, but it's the prices that drive the money supply. It's a bit difficult maybe to get the idea, but actually, if you keep pumping supplementary money into the economy, the only thing that will happen is that your money will be less worth and that you will have inflation. That's the point that he's making. Now, this quantitative easing, yes, of course, it's been a key factor in the explosion of the inflation. Are we then going to say, oh yeah, but you shouldn't have put money in the pockets of people? Of course not. That's not the question that is on the table here. But if you create money and there is no production in real terms of services and goods that absorbs this money, you can either have a period, as we have long known, that you have this money immediately flooding into the financial markets, even into Ponzi schemes. I don't know if the comrades know that, pyramids. No word under it. The cryptocurrencies, $4 trillion at a certain stage, they collapsed to under $1 trillion, and they are now back up to $1 trillion. So a lot of people have lost a lot of money. Probably those who shouldn't lose the money that have lost it. But that's probably the situation that is there. So if your question is, did quantitative easing, and especially the fact that part of it, only a small part, only about 25%, really came into the pockets because they needed it, not because they wanted it, because they needed it. The fact that that happens, the problem with money as opposed to goods is goods, they come into circulation once, twice. Some of us drive with a car which has been already bought in second, in third hand, or in fourth hand, but that's more or less it. But if I start spending money here in the shop will spend the money, it can very quickly multiply. And that's the problem with money. Once it starts to roll, it can immediately lead to overheating of the economy, which doesn't have anything to do with our spending power, which has to do, of course, with the fact that money rolls. And in this way, of course, if not combined with production, is extremely weakening the effect. That's, I think, the element. What we have to remember, and I think that we are a bit in this school at this stage, I think we didn't sufficiently warn for what stagflation could mean and how we're gonna battle in this period of stagflation. Actually, if we had the choice, we would be in favor of a moderate recession, because it would give us time to prepare. It would give us time to mobilize around us. If we are ending up in a stagflation period, which is the most likely scenario at this stage on the table, especially with the war, but not only with the war, of course, accelerated enormously with the war, then we will have a confrontation which, to our opinion, would be difficult for us, might create more problems. Now, I also think at the same time that if you have such a period of stagflation in the actual conditions, that even though it might stop the more organized workers for a while from reacting, maybe push them back, make a more defensive position, that other layers in the workers' movement, as a byproduct of this liberalization of the labor market, will have no other choice than to react. And so it will give us opportunities to intervene in it. But with whatever we say, whether it's on racism, on sexism, whether it's on inflation, whether it's on the war, if we stop presenting our program by the negative, we're going to lose out. It's the extreme right and the populist right which are going to be the ones who harvest most. We will have to have a real fight to make sure that others can hear what we have to say, what kind of proposals we are to make. Because let's be clear, there is no option for a Mitterrand or a Tsipras to play out in a better way than they did in the past. The margins for that are even more reduced than they were. And in that sense, for us to have a sensitive approach, to try to concretize our program, to try to put forward that demands in a way that people can understand them. I think that Paul, in the back of the room, he made a very good point when he was saying about the sliding scale of wages and the sliding scale of hours, which is important to mention with it because of the productivity, that in order to bring it, we have to concretize it. And that's, to my opinion, what we have to be prepared for. Hopefully we get some more time. Hopefully a recession will take a little bit longer, will be more over a longer period, but less deep. We can hope for it, but let's prepare. Let's hope for the best and let's prepare for the worst and make sure that we have alternatives we offer. In this week, we can play a role and start rebuilding our force. I had lost one idea, occupations. Who said it? You said it. Because what is the situation today? When you go in a struggle in one factory, usually over local issues, you have rank and file workers involved. When you have a national strike, you very often have the activists involved, but a sense amongst about ordinary workers not to get involved. It's not ideal, but occupations, they prepare those workers to do more generalized actions. And in that sense, I do agree that this is something that we have to bring up, and which was, by the way, one of the hallmarks in the 30s and in the 70s. Thank you.